Morning all. Let's have a look at the candidates round 3. So the first game I want to check out here with you is Ivanchuk against Aronian. Vassily playing white played d4, and after knight f6 we see the Trompovsky. Now Julian Hodgson was one of the strong British grandmasters that used this to win the British Championship many times with the Trompovsky, and he's got books and material on it. It can be a very dangerous weapon, especially if you're not very well prepared as black. So what did Aronian have in store? Well, he plays actually e6 here, and we see knight d2, c5, and now white just supports that d4 pawn and is setting up a kind of London system with the bishop just on g5, because this central pawn triangle is about to be set up. So it looks a little bit like a London system, but in the London system the bishop's on f4 on that diagonal. Okay, bishop e7, bishop d3. It's what I'd call a kind of grippy opening, trying not to give black too much counterplay and easy kind of files and pressure. Black's going to have to work on undermining white's structure, often with longer range plans, like trying to undermine this pawn chain, for example with a minority attack later, which involves getting a pawn to b4 and trying to undermine the structure later perhaps, is an often used plan, because it's a very, very solid central structure here. Black castled here, and now actually Vassily voluntarily gives up his dark squared bishop. It seems quite a radical move in some respects, not even waiting for h6. So what's the idea? Well, after bishop takes f6 we see a very, very aggressive move, not castling. The idea is revealed, h4. So it really looks like a kind of hack attack system, this kind of opening I'd use in war zones for a quick mate on h7. The problem with this kind of approach is very committal. It's like you're burning your boats with the attack. If the attack doesn't work, often you're left with a very bad position strategically. Black does have the bishop pair, but the dark square bishop at the moment is facing granite in the centre, so that's not an immediate major concern. Okay, how did Levon play this? Was he worried about any bishop h7s or knight g5s? Well, with his next move he wasn't actually. He wasn't worried about any tactics in the position here. It looks as though bishop takes h7 might be quite tempting, but I guess it doesn't do too much for knight g5, a kind of fishing pole. Maybe we can check that briefly in the second pass, but another way of attacking h7 is use knight g5. So it's incredible to see this type of game at this high level. Maybe, you know, I guess we can suspect Ivanchuk might be annoyed from the previous day, the missed opportunity, but he was in huge time pressure, so I doubt that's the reason. He just outright playing for a win in this game with attacking chess. And this knight g5, actually, it's not just about attacking h7. The idea now is f4, and we have a kind of, what we have now is a reverse stonewall without a bad bishop on c1, and it looks, you know, in principle it looks as though this is quite promising, especially with h5 maybe on the cards at some point, or the use of e4. So black has to be very careful. We see now knight e7 from Levon. This f5 square is potentially quite useful for knight, or the d5 square, and this structure here. Okay, without the dark square bishop we can say this structure, pawns on the dark squares, are a bit looser than usual, because although this is a bad bishop in inverted commas, it is kind of adding some solidity to white's position. Also with this move, an attack on g2 is unveiled, and this next move protects g2, and maybe, you know, crudely the queen can potentially come to h3 later, or just h5. It is supporting as well the knight on g5. If this knight moves, then h5 might become possible. We see black now responding with h5, stopping white's potential for h5 there for a moment. Queen h3, and now Levon plays c takes d4, so he's starting to undermine white on the dark squares. As I say, without the dark square bishop, these are slightly looser, And we see after e takes d4, it's not just this structure which might be targeted later with a b4, but f4 can be potentially vulnerable here. Black's next move looks set to try and rock the structure and even sack a pawn to do so. It would be, I think, far too dangerous to give Black so much pressure after taking this pawn. White just tries to keep his structure intact and stop an imminent minority attack. It's called a minority attack when a minority of pawns tries to attack the majority with the aim of causing structural damage. For example, you could end up with double pawns, weakened d4, etc. Queen b6, and it looks as though every move at the moment of Black is targeting dark squares or pawns on dark squares. Rook g1, as though really g4 might be on the cards. Now we see knight d5 immediately attacking f4. So how is this protected or indirectly protected? Well, we see knight ge4. The knight can't move without losing f6. Bishop tucks back, and now f4 needs to be protected. It's protected with queen f3. And now we see a very radical kind of attack on white's structure, which, as I mentioned, is a subject of attack, especially without white's dark square bishop. Black accelerates his campaign by playing the move b4, believe it or not. And this is setting up a lot of tactics now. And this queen on f3 eyed by that bishop is one subject for a potential pin with f5 maybe. So what is going on here after b4? Well, Ivanchuk takes, and then we see knight takes b4. And this looks very dangerous now. White's structure is really being attacked. White played now the move knight c4, attacking Black's queen and offering the light squared bishop. That's not taken here. Just queen b5 is played in this position. And this starts to look really quite kind of hair-raising. What is actually going on here? Well, if White did take, then maybe check and then f5 to exploit this pin, for example. But it's getting very technical, very tactical. Knight e5 is played, attacking the queen like this, offering that bishop, and the bishop is taken. Knight takes d3, so we have a 2 knights versus 2 bishops scenario now. Queen f5. Now knight dc5 is played, attacking the bishop. Bishop c6, b4, and now pressure on again White's structure. Rook fb8, as though maybe a5 is also going to be useful. We see rook a5 now, and I believe at this point there's a computer suggestion emerging. When I was watching the stream yesterday on a site called Chessbomb, which have real-time computer analysis, I do recommend Chessbomb. But there's an amazing computer move in this position, which maybe we can touch on in second pass. But rook takes, pardon me, not rook takes b4, but bishop takes d4. Just giving up the bishop here is actually quite tactically promising. It gets immediately 2 pawns and leaves White struggling with this horrendous pin, and also a pin across here. It's something very, very tactical that I think computers can verify very, very easily, because they're looking at millions of positions a second. But to play that sort of move requires extreme precision, which really humans don't have. And the 2 IMs commenting on the live stream for the event, Malcolm Payne and Lawrence Trent, they didn't really consider bishop takes d4 as well. It's really a computer blow, this move, bishop takes d4, and it wasn't played. But you can see this position is starting to go a little bit downhill here, because, well, it is very technical. I think we need a second pass for that. But this opportunity was still there now, potentially on the cards after a6. But no, now White supports e3 to stop bishop. It stops actually bishop d4 ideas. Okay, so has Black been let off? Has Black let Ivanchuk off the hook a little bit? But the problem is Ivanchuk's consuming a lot of time in this game, He's getting behind on the clock. Queen G4, and now this move which, okay, the H4 pawn is attacked. There's not too many choices. G3, and let me see Rook B5, offering up the A6 pawn. But what is Black's idea? Well, his idea is unveiled. It's really to open up the dark square bishop. He's offering this A6 pawn, that's taken, and now opening up the position with this E5. It really tries to damage White's structure. If F takes, of course, we can take the knight. So D takes is played, and now we see Bishop takes E4, and I guess the expected reply was Queen takes E4. That was, I think, it must have been the expected reply. But actually, it will be a horrendous blunder, coming to think about it here, because actually there's a tactic available to Black. If White had played Queen takes E4, and let's just put this on the board, can you see what I've just seen? There's an amazing tactic for Black potentially. Does it actually work in this position? Possibly. I think this is actually something for second pass analysis, because it's complicated with Queen A8 checks. I was just thinking about this pin here and E5 being vulnerable, but actually with Queen A8 that becomes complicated. So in this position, actually the game explodes with interest for the spectators, because Vassily doesn't automatically recapture this bishop for the tactical reasons which we'll try and explore in the second pass. He plays a stunning and surprising move, C4, and actually the rook has no squares. It seems it can be captured on not too many squares anyway. In this position, it does seem to have B7, but on B7, maybe Queen takes E4, and there's definitely less of an issue, it seems, with E5, because there's coordination here on E5. Now in this position we have another shocking reply, which I think turns out to be the best move on engine inspection. Rook B6, just offering an exchange sack. And it really has to be noted that Vassily Ivanchuk was greatly short of time here. We're talking just less than minutes really, and okay, he snaps up this rook, and you might wonder what is the compensation here. Well, Queen F3, and it's really quite dangerous for White's king with moves like Queen C3 and Bishop D3. The Queen goes back, and now Queen A3 attacking the knight, which is fairly unpleasant here, because also there's things like Queen C1. In fact, we'll try and make sure we do a threat analysis here as well. This is a very, very tactical game. It will be very, very interesting to put this under engine scrutiny, this position. But with only seconds, left, I think, coming up now, Ivanchuk played Knight C5, and I think his flag actually drops now. Unfortunately, after Queen takes B4, King D1, his flag fell, I think, at move 35. And the players don't need to call out the flag, the arbiter sees the flag falling. The game had to be terminated here. It is a shame, but I think White's actually in big trouble here, actually, technically. Let's turn on engine and do some engine analysis for this game. It's really tactically worthy, I think. After Bishop F5, you can see that Black seems to have, from an engine perspective, a very big advantage here. What is actually the threat? Well, Bishop F8 looks to me to be a major threat. Bishop F8 just undermining the knight here, as well as Queen takes C4. So it's difficult to parry these things. If say Queen D4, Bishop F8 here, actually there's Knight D3 apparently. Queen B6, what does this actually do? Again, Bishop F8 is renewed as a threat. And this just looks really dangerous. So let's give an example. Check. Taking. White's king is pretty unsafe, and Black's two bishops seem very good compensation for the exchange in this position. Seems white is in actually great difficulty. He can't move his king. This is a very, very difficult position. If say rook f2 as an example, bishop b4 starts to get really nasty. If here queen e4 check, you can see that it's a very, very unpleasant position with the king being kicked about here and lots of weaknesses around. So let's get rid of that extra lines. So okay, but I think we really need to go back here in this game and examine some tactical moments. So the first tactical is this idea that is actually bishop h7 is that even on the cards here instead of knight g5, just for those hackers watching this video. Well, actually knight g5, if the fishing pole's taken, then it's like a disaster. It's a mate in 4. So that's clear. The intention in this position, the strongest move actually is to stop white using the h5 square, and king h6 ticks that box. Or even king g8 is still better. No, king g8 actually loses by force, it seems, because queen h5. If white is using that h5 square, it's losing by force. Taking here, check. So this is a great hack attack system. Knight de4. What is black doing here? What is actually white threatening now? Queen h7 and queen g6 is the major threat, and this is pretty bad news. If you remember at the Olympiad, at the last Olympiad, Ivanchuk had a brilliancy with this kind of system, hacking up one of the top Chinese players, helping Ukraine doing really well in the Olympiad. This looks just really, really unpleasant for black. Even stronger apparently, knight gf7. So we're threatening mate. Black has to give up the queen here. What's wrong with king f8? Knight e5 threatening mate again. And now black has to give up the queen, because if rook e7, queen h8 is mate. So this is the kind of nightmare that can be faced by black. But bishop takes h7, king takes. Here, in this position, black actually has the resource king h6. That will stop white using the h5 square. And it looks difficult to see how to proceed the attack. The attack, I think, is nothing much in this position. This is opening up that bishop, being able to use the f5 square. Okay, it looks maybe a little bit scary, but black has sufficient resources now to beat off the attack. And in fact here, maybe even the king can go back. The queen is unsupported now. So in this position we see knight g5, not bishop h7, knight g5, and cautious defense, g6. Any h5, there's bishop g5, it would seem that would be hopeless. So f4. And the problem, as I say, with white actually is fundamentally this bad bishop is missing. There's a lack of solidity on the dark squares potentially that can be tapped into as a result. So knight e7, queen g4, we see h5. And this lack of solidity on the dark square complex is now undermined, cd, and b5 aiming for an accelerated attack on the structure. Now on bishop takes b5, I think there's just counterplay with rook b8 or queen c7. It's just white's distracted. Black's still going to build up. What are the concrete threats like rook ab8? And there's just annoying pressure, knight f5. It's the ball is in black's court. So a3, but black is already kind of better. White's kind of committed to this attacking formation. Losing that dark square bishop. It's up to black to really emphasize this. After rook g5, rook g1, knight d5. So knight e4, bishop drops back to g7. So far you see that black's technically better. Now this b4 is a little bit of a surprise. On a5, which I was thinking is more sort of without having to sacrifice, it might not be as dangerous, but it still seems quite dangerous to just do even this simple plan of this minority attack. White might have a resource like knight c5, say bishop c6, and then b4, and we can still carry out this minority attack. And even if white gets in c4 here, you know, d4's been damaged, and white's starting to be a little bit wobbly, and that a file can also be used by black. So it is starting to be dangerous in any case, but this kind of is in accelerated dramatic fashion. b4 immediately, try and destroy this structure in the center. And look at the evaluation on it now. After a takes, black's nearly like 1.5 pawns up. Knight takes b4. So what was actually going on here? If c takes b, for example, instead of knight c4, f5 using that horrendous pin on the queen. And if knight c4, just queen takes d4, and this is just a massacre. This position. Surely all of white's pieces are kind of loose. White can try this. It just looks absolutely horrendous. Everything's falling to bits now. b2's falling pretty shortly, or g1 even. Okay, it's a massacre. So this move, knight c4, is probably one of the better moves, it seems. C takes b4 is actually one of the better moves as well. It's amazing that knight c4, as in the game, seems to almost let white back in the game. Maybe it's the move queen b5. It wasn't entirely accurate here, because there is this horrendous pin potential with f5 to exploit and celebrate that pin. If queen c7 had been played, this is very dangerous. Surely that black can casually just keep that pin and take on d4 here, it seems, and attacking the rook as well, just taking the rook. If this rook bothers to move, then black's got time surely for something like f5 or d5, d5, even better. I guess f5 might not be, there's something wrong with it. Queen g3. Okay, so but d5 here, and black's doing very well. But in the game, we saw after knight c4, we saw queen b5, and the evaluation actually dropping significantly from the engine point of view, as though white's got a chance again in the game, at least technically. So queen f5, knight dc5. The knights seem to be enjoying themselves a bit in this position now, and they're being reinforced as well. b4. Okay, now rook a5, reinforcing the knight again on c5. But it's here I think that a resource like bishop takes d4 was mentioned on the powerful computers of chess.com. Bishop takes d4. At the moment, at this depth, it's not being picked up. Now, depth 15, yeah, bishop takes d4. Okay, so maybe this machine is not entirely hopeless either. We see rook takes b4. White's just collapsing here. The structure has been absolutely destroyed with this horrendous pin, and there's also a pin horizontally like this on this loose rook here. So say queen d3, rook ab8. What is actually black threatening? This is quite difficult to imagine. Check and taking on f4. It seems white is kind of frozen here. He can't move any pieces. He can't move this knight. He can't move this knight. And black's just simply threatening now rook b1 check. So let's give an example of the horrors of rook b1, or try and stop rook b1. We can take here. And actually, we can use this pin here. Queen takes c5. That's horrible. That's much better for. And if knight takes e4, rook b3, and now the check, and now taking on f4 after king f2. It's really getting horrendous. And white's forced to do this. Knight d2. That's not a good sign. So that would be, but it's just a computer tactic that existed in the position. It's not really one for humans here. Bishop takes d4, but it does seem to crumble and collapse white's position. Instead, a6 was played, and we see now queen e3 extinguished. So queen e3, one of the better moves to add solidity again to white's center. Queen g4, and it looks as though the evaluation has been really suppressed here. g3 as though there's nothing much, almost, but and there's some potential with rook b5 offering this a6. So Levon's keeping his position very dynamic with rook b5. It's interesting, if the rook just stumbled back, what is the idea? Either a5 or rook bb8. a5 looks energetic, and if it takes, we can start to just use this a file. That's pretty nasty. So really, this pawn is taken, and now we get this very tactical move e5. So let's try and see what is actually this about. After d takes e5, we see bishop takes e4. And the move c4 is given by the engine as a slight plus. This is the first time in the game White has had a slight plus in this position with the move he played c4. Now I believe that intuitively queen e4 is a disaster relating to e5. Let's just check this. Queen takes e4. So in fact it is rook takes e5. There's no check. Of course there's no check, because the queen is pinned. The king's still in the centre. It's not just about this pin. This is end of game, basically. This is an end of game move. Rook takes e5. Pardon me. So that had to be avoided. And this is the best move on the board, c4. And now black responds, I think, with the best move on the board. Instead of rook b7, and I think it will take this computer a while, but I think rook b6 was actually stronger than rook b7. Let's wait here. So depth 19 is looking at rook b7, queen e4, as though that's about equal. But yeah, it's not picking up. If I put in another line, rook b6 now actually has popped up as an alternative, as in a way it's sacrificing the exchange. And from the engine point of view, it looks as though White should be able to hold superficially at this, well, when I say superficially, at depth 20. So rook b6, a viable move as played, offering an exchange for this queen f3. Now what is actually queen f3 threatening? It's threatening actually mate in 8 with queen c3 check. Queen d3, well, it's a mate in 8 threat apparently, starting with queen c3 check. So we see queen f2. Black's better anyway with queen c3 check here. He played actually queen a3, but queen c3 check apparently technically better. Check, taking here. And although the exchange down, is this to be believed that black is actually still better the exchange down in this position? The king's a little bit shaky there. This bishop here has got all of these weaknesses to just, with this structure here, it's quite weakened. So a move like queen a3 has very serious threats associated with it, like on f3. Now this is just really dangerous, but it's better than White's been all game if you look at the evaluation here. But unfortunately, Ivanchuk's in so much time pressure that even with the inferior move, it seems queen a3. Apparently queen d4, and I think a lot of the threats are being parried here now after queen d4, attacking this bishop. The bishop moves back, then knight c5, but he just couldn't make it to the time control. He was just so short of time, unfortunately. But the move he played was actually in this position. He actually played knight c5, which drops b4, and then black's definitely got a lot of compensation for the exchange. It drops b4. There's no queen d2 without losing c5, and after bishop f5, black's better anyway. So there's unfortunately, it's time pressure really does creep into the game, even in very long games. At some point, there's going to be time pressure. So we often associate blitz chess with blunders, but if you're under severe time pressure, it's really a problem for one-day games, of course. And he just didn't make it. He lost on time, I believe. So a very, very dramatic game. It's an amazing contrast to round one. The tournament has exploded. This is a very, very interesting, bloodthirsty tournament, I've got to say now. Let's look at another game from the round. I'll just quickly save that PGN just in case. So chess games. Let's go on to Gelfand against Magnus Carlsen. So Boris Gelfand playing white played d4. Okay, and Magnus played knight f6. So Magnus started the tournament with 2 draws, and people are starting to get worried. Will he actually do well in this tournament? He's got to win at some point soon, because otherwise Levon's going to like mow the field uninterrupted and win this tournament. There's no prizes for second. It's the candidates to play Anand later in the year. They've got to try and win this tournament. So e6, we see a solid, very solid system from Magnus. You know, he's not thinking I've got to win, I've got to play the Leningrad Dutch or something radical. No, it's very, very solid play. Queen's Gambit declined setup. Now, kind of Cambridge Springs. And you might think this is really weird. Isn't Cambridge Springs just a weak, surely a very, very weak opening? It was only in the Alekhine-Irvin matches that we saw that, or before that against Radjabov, or Alekhine-Capablanca matches. Well, Magnus plays Queen A5. It's odd to see this from the world number one, in my opinion, as a complete bunny. But this is chess. You know, you can play. He's showing you can play any opening, rare bird openings. It's Cambridge Springs. There's some traps here set for white in the Cambridge Springs. For example, you know, the knight e4 idea. If you haven't seen this trap, that this bishop could be potentially loose on g5. For example, here you could end up losing the bishop. But that's not the idea of the system. Is not really for that trap. Although I guess some players use it. But one of the problems intuitively with the system is that the queen might be subject to harassment, but that's a little bit behind in development. And here it seems after cd knight takes d5, white's got a comfortable position with the centre. The centre looks quite comfortable. Okay, knight takes c3, takes bishop a3, rook c2, b6. I think people were surprised. Why is Magnus playing like this, giving white a seemingly comfortable position? And in terms of aggressive pawn play, this isn't the case. Magnus doesn't often play with aggressive pawn formations, and here it's typical. He's playing on weaknesses of squares. He's trying to weaken white's light squares with this move b6. If he can swap off the bishops, he's going to try and play on c4 and d5 later. It's very, very strategical, nothing too radical. Try and swap these bishops off and try and make use of these light squares now. So onto castles. White is tempted a little bit more forward with e4. Now white has to be trying to avoid potentially a bad structure where the pawn structure becomes fixed, immobilized, on dark squares especially, because in endgames this knight, this pesky knight, could be a real menace on the light squares against a fixed structure on the dark squares. So white, though, doesn't seem too concerned. He plays e5 now, and his structure is getting quite fixed. And now Magnus is undermining the centre, c5. Okay, knight d2. Magnus is not too concerned about knight c4 here. He plays c takes d4. And now rook ac8. So it seems as though he's got a kind of nice French defence position, actually, with white having a potentially backward pawn and weakened light squares to make use of. Knight c4, and now a pin made use of against the queen. f4, another pawn on a dark square. It does look as though it's a favourable French defence, basically, for black type structure. So rook c7, offering bishop for knight, actually. So queen takes a3, rook takes c4. So we end up with this transition where this knight is potentially a menace on the light squares as a blockader of this fixed pawn structure on dark squares? Is this bishop really going to be great later? d4's under fire, it's protected. Queen c7, rook c1, queen d7, queen d6. White has pressure though. White has pressure. That does count for something. Knight f8, g3, another pawn on a dark square. So positionally, it looks structurally, is this knight really going to have prospects though later on to try and maybe exploit these light squares? Or is white's pressure here and use of the c-file conversation? Well, the c-file is neutralized anyway with rook c8. A pair of rooks come off. And now d5, which is actually increasing white's pawn structure mobility, like this f pawn. If this pawn's not there, this f pawn might be freer to be made use of later. So queen takes d5, g6. Now knight e6, king g7. White's structure is becoming fixed though, more and more fixed now after h5. It looks like just a French defense type position with a bad bishop in principle. h4, another pawn on the dark squares. Now Boris is another player like Ivanchuk who would have been annoyed from maybe from the day before, maybe when even the top 2700s, if they're like us lesser mortals, if they lose a horrible game the day before, maybe they're affected the next day and they're not playing their best game. But is this a problem? If it wasn't Magnus Carlsen playing black, would it really be a problem? Even though the knight is in principle a great jumper and blockader on the light squares, is that achievable? Because white seems to have a very dangerous break to affect black's king safety. But now we see queen c2 seems to be designed against f5, queen b7, queen a4. Okay, just continue now. So queen f3 and now b5. And this reminds me, black actually has a 2-to-1 pawn majority. White has the 4-to-3, but it's more fixed, it's less mobile. But on the other hand, most people, I think, would be concerned about f5 here for king safety. So this 4-to-3, even though it's fixed, it's dangerous because black's king's over there. And there's this comment the other day in the commentaries, post-game commentaries from Peter Svidler, how in kindergarten they're taught that 2-to-1 is better than 4-to-3. And I thought this is a very, very interesting example, because in practice, where are the kings in this theoretical concept? Now, why would 2-to-1 be better than 4-to-3? Well, one thing is, if this pawn is eliminated, it's simply two connected passed pawns, which are really, really dangerous. 4-to-3 here has the impact on black's king safety. Magnus has to factor this in and try and get rid of this pawn to ideally make this two connected passed pawns. And he's allowing f5, which does also damage the structure here. So f6 can't be tolerated. I think that will definitely like mating that time. But he's going to end up losing h5 for a3 now. So after g takes, queen takes f5, queen takes a3, queen takes h5. Okay, so 2-to-0 pawn majority transition. But has white got any chances against the black king? Well, the knight's actually sitting very well centrally here against most threats. And now after a5, check. Okay, h5. It looks as though, well, maybe there's a combination of this pawn, for example, is generating some potential threats. Just h6 and h7. We see queen c1 putting a stop to the pawn. Queen e4. So these checks are going to be useful. Queen a4, well, this check rather. b4, the 2-to-0 pawn majority, the two connected passed pawns are coming down now. Bishop e3, but is it dangerous? Bishop e3 looks to be eyeing h6. King safety needs to be factored in. Queen c7, check. King g7, and now white plays h6, which is another pawn on the same colour as the bishop. So is there going to be a light square blockade with the king itself just being the light square blockader? Can white make progress here? Can he lift the blockade? Check. Check. And now queen d8 stops the checks. and offers this knight versus bishop ending where these pawns look quite dangerous. So, and this is taken up now. So queen takes d8. Actually, let's black's actually better now. I'm not really sure we need the engine analysis in this simplified position, but anyway. So king f3, but a4. It seems, yeah, black's advantage is creeping forwards as these two connected passed pawns have been made use of. And in fact now it's a decisive advantage actually after knight c6. We see bishop c1. Magnus's move knight a5 is liked here to get these pawns going. Bishop d2, and now the tactical move b3, just offering the knight because of course b2 is queening. Bishop can't come back in time. These pawns are just going forwards and forwards. Now b2 can be answerable with king c2, so this knight c4 now, trying to decoy the king away from c2. That's immune again, and now supporting, for example, knight takes d2, and the pawn's just actually supporting b2 is the immediate concern. Bishop c3, stopping b2, a3, pushing forwards for b2, even offering the knight again because b2 is just queening again. Look at white's pawns, they're way off from doing anything useful. White's got no dangerous passed pawn here to compensate. g4, we see king h7. g5. Okay. As though there might be a hint of something going on here. What is white actually threatening? Not really anything in particular. White doesn't seem to have any major threat, but Magnus just blockades this anyway. King g6. We see bishop d4, b2, king c2, and now the knight d2 is the final move. White gives up here. If he's gonna have this position a piece down, I think it's pretty hopeless. Yeah, it's all over. It's been mopped up. So great technique from Magnus in this game. He basically he seemed to get a kind of favourable French defence type position. If we look at this structure and how the light square bishops were exchanged off, it's almost as if you could say it's like a favourable French defence without any king issues for some time. White's putting a lot of pawns fixed on dark squares. Black, with this transaction here, black has transformed it into 2-to-1 pawn majority on this side, which from what Peter Lico's saying, I think there's an assumption that's better than white having a 4-to-3 on the other side. So we get a 2-to-1 pawn majority behind the scenes now structurally. Okay. And this bishop versus knight scenario, which sometimes is very bad for the bad bishop. All the pawns are on the same colour as the bishop, of course. It looks to be, kind of anti-positional, but white has these all the time on the king side with the pawns, if nothing else, it would seem. But Magnus is now fixing down this structure even more. Let's just rewind there. Where did the pawn? This pawn exchange leads to the 4-to-3 now. This pawn exchange here, which did liberate the bishop across that diagonal. Now it seemed kind of justified. So we have that scenario, 2-to-1 versus 4-to-3 scenario, with a better knight particularly than the bishop. But most people will be quite frightened now of white's dynamic play. Two connected passed pawns. Checks run out. Well, they seem to after this pair, queen d8. And if the white queen moved back, apparently queen d3. If queen f3, queen d3, and this starts to look quite miserable. Check, maybe king h7 now. Queen f3 attacking f7, queen g6. And I think these pawns are set to go again. But in the game we saw the bishop versus knight ending with the two connected passed pawns. The knight's very resourceful here. after bishop d2. Is that a decisive mistake? White was worse now anyway. White looks to be considerably worse. So this is nice tactical play in this ending, and it's all over. Okay, a very interesting bloodthirsty round so far, just from the two games I've shown you now. Let's go on to see another. So Kramnik against Grischuk. Kramnik against Grischuk. Kramnik playing white d4, and we see g3 fianchetto variation. C takes d5. I would say King's Engine or Broomfield type fianchetto for both sides. e3, rook e8. I'm pretty sure I've seen this opening being used at British Championships a little bit in some games. Okay, so h3, and black strikes the centre with e5, inviting white for d5, which seems on the surface quite favourable, but black has play here. Queen c2, undermining the centre now. b4, the knight goes to c4. White takes, attacks the queen. Knight d2. Okay, so has white got, for example, a target there worth having this position? Actually, he plays now knight ce4. Okay, this is tying down this knight a little bit. So a3. That pawn was now apparently on. So h5. Now Vladimir does take on c4, inviting exchange of rooks. Now rook a2. Okay, rook d8. Black does seem to have active pieces. Queen f1, but white seems solid enough for the moment. This c5 square, I think, is the major positional concern, getting a knight to c5 and then taking it from there. So now knight d6, we see knight c5, knight b5 though, offering the c6 pawn dynamically for dynamic play. So attacking the rook now, and after rook d2 we have some loose pieces which were exploited. So this is what black was playing for. Queen d6, attacking both loose pieces. So okay, queen takes c6. White is a pawn up here, but okay, queen d6. Black has enough play, it would seem, for the moment. e4, we see check. Bishop c8. f3, queen c1. Queen d2. And the queen's got to hang about for the perpetual check, because this bishop's going to be lost, so it needs to hang around for perpetual checks. Queen g2, queen c1. It's difficult to do anything about this active queen. Black's got enough play here, and they repeat. Okay, maybe that seems to be, compared to the first two bloodthirsty games, it seems to be fairly uneventful. But tactically, I'm not really sure, just from playing through there, what was going on. Let's have a quick look again. Engine inspection, just quick engine inspection as well. So black playing for e5. This is all. I think I've seen this before. This kind of thing, this opening. So knight d2 is mentioned. Rook d1. It looks as though it's, from an engine point of view, it's about equal here. I think white dare not play something like queen b3. I think then e4 is like major, potentially, or bishop e6 here. Okay, so he just goes into a self pin. but he's threatening that knight now. So here, if this pawn has been taken in this position, what's the idea? Surely not a3. What does a3 do? That's using the pin. If the queen goes back here, well, he loses the knight. The knight is hanging, but actually the engine's coming up with queen b5 or queen c5, using that pin to hold on to the c4 knight. Okay, now a4 here is threatening a5, among other things. I think that's the major threat, just a5 starting to win material. And if black takes now, white's getting that knight square bishop and a lot of pressure. This is the sort of thing which I guess Vladimir would have absolutely loved to have played. But unfortunately, in this position, this b pawn is ignored. Grischuk had just played rook ad8. And now black is probably threatening queen takes b4 with much more punch, and it's actually protected. White's potentially got g4, I guess, as a threat here, positional threat maybe, or not. Maybe one potential positional threat, g4. Well, there's other stuff going on instead. Okay, but h5 does seem to prevent g4 in any case. Just in case, knight takes c4. Rook takes d1, and now this knight recapture. Rook a2. So we see the queen going to f1. Okay, now we see knight d6 inviting knight c5 to get knight b5 and inviting white to take on c6, which the engine likes here. So what is going on here? Well, we see after knight c3, white hasn't got too many move choices. Rook d2 is actually what the engine likes here. If rook b2, we have rook d1. Ouch, that's pretty nasty. So rook d2 is virtually forced in this position. There's no other move, it seems. On e4, we just take care and then take the rook. Most accurate. So rook d2 virtually forced against rook d1, basically. So we get this continuation where there's not too many choices for white. So black has the bishop pair, white has the extra pawn. What is black actually threatening now, if given another move? Just queen d5, queen f3. That looks promising, the f3 square actually. So queen g2 inviting an exchange of queens. Of course black doesn't want that. e4, and now this queen is just too dangerous, it seems, for white to try and win the game now. It's probably quite frustrating here, but white's a pawn up but can't do anything with it. This queen, I think, is guaranteeing pressure. So f3, we see actually queen c1. White doesn't want to lose a3 here. If he loses a3, let's say bishop d2 offering a3. What are the actual problems? Well, for a start, I think a5 might be a threat now for the c5 knight being loose. So I think black is the one that's better, basically here. Bishop f8 to follow. So best to play just queen d2 to threaten queen d8 here and secure the draw. Black's got enough play. Okay. Interesting game still. So a fighting draw. Let's go on to the next game. Pardon me. The other game of the round, Svidler against Radjabov. So, Svidler against Radjabov. d4 by Svidler. We see knight f6, and actually Radjabov does reel out his king's engine defense. So we really do have attacking, fun, aggressive chess in this round, and the Simish variation f3. So how does Radjabov deal with the Simish? Radjabov is actually 2793, FIDE rating 2793, a little bit higher than Peter Svidler, 2747. So Radjabov, if you remember, is the wild card of the tournament, put in by FIDE. So very exciting opening here for King's Engine enthusiasts in particular to make notes here. Knight Ge2, Knight C6, offering this gambit, which I enjoy playing as well in Blitz. White ignores it, gives black that potentially juicy E5 square, but actually A5 is used, and black plays a kind of Benko gambit style. He plays as though he wants more of a Benko gambit position out of this now. So bishop E2, Knight D7, to rook C1, B5, generating activity, counterplay like this. Svidler accepts the gambit, so he takes on B5, Knight E5. It looks as though this is quite dangerous now. If white loses this dark square bishop, he's going to be faced with a lot of dark square issues and tactics. So after castles, Knight C4, he moves it now to G5, bishop D7, bishops come off, the light square bishops, Queen E2. Interesting, white is threatening to push black back, gaining a lot of tempo on these knights, with B3 followed by maybe F4, and it looks just potentially very, very nice, because you can imagine also a bind on the B5 square later. And maybe this looks slightly controversial, this next move. Radjabov sacks his knights now to get a rook, so he's actually sacrificing both knights are off the board for just white's rook and a pawn. Rook and a pawn for two knights. It's not usually an amazing transaction in general. And furthermore, black continues now forcefully with bishop takes C3. And you might think, the horror of it, giving up the dark square bishop here. What is actually going on? Well, white doesn't want to lose A2, so he takes with the rook. Then we see rook FB8, and there's this question posed that can these pieces actually coordinate effectively as a team here? Black's immediate threat is rook B1, so queen C2 is played. F6, bishop goes back to C1. And this is a very powerful move, I believe, because it supports the idea of A3, just putting a stop to the A file actions. Queen A4, and now A3. So where is black's play now? For giving up two pieces for the rook. King F7, Knight F1. The knight is going for a very juicy square, this C4 square. Queens come off. F5, trying to destroy white's centre. It's an often used tactic in the D5 structures for black later to try and undermine and explode the white centre. So Knight D2, okay, Rook A4, putting more pressure on the centre, but Knight C4 squashes, it seems, black's counterplay a little bit, and threatening now E5 perhaps. So this is taken. Rook B3. Okay, King F2, King E8. There's no rush to play E5 here. It might just lose a pawn for nothing or destabilise white. White's knight on C4 is fine and beautiful there. Having said that, there's some nuances going on here with the position with the king on F2 now, because in this position actually E5 is played in this position. Okay, and black didn't take. Black played Rook A6, and now we see ED. This is like a poor pawn in the Benoni, son of sorrow. Often termed this poor Benoni type pawn on D6, subject to being pressurized and bullied here. So bishop f4, the bullying starts of the d6 pawn. So it's coordinating white's pieces in the process. Why not? King d2, king centralizing. King c3, supporting the knight, freeing the rook. And the rook can now switch to gang up further on the d6 pawn. White's material up. Where is black's compensation here? A sniff of d5. Okay, rook e6, swapping d5 for g6. Can these pawns be dangerous? Well, no, actually white transitions now with bishop takes d6 potentially. This king and pawn ending is winning for white. If everything came off here, it's absolutely winning for white. White's got the outside pass pawn, can blockade the c pawn. So black actually just took on h4 here. And now some forceful moves driving the king back. Check. Check. Bishop takes c5. After rook e6. Check. Knight c4. Very dangerous threats now for the black king are emerging. Rook g4. Check. Now here if rook takes, then rook takes g4, then bishop d6. So king b8. Check. Rook d7. Threatening mate on the spot. That needs to be parried. Rook g8. Now knight c4. Really dangerous stuff. Okay. We see rook takes g2. Bishop d6 threatening. Knight b6 mate. Ouch. So this is getting desperate for black. He sacks the rook here. Sacks the exchange rather. But white's consolidating here. He's getting behind black's pawn. Getting his king away from the checks. And here actually Radjabov was forced to resign. Let's just check this final position. Really bloodthirsty round. 3 of the 4 games decisive. Everyone's going for it. The tournament is amazing. Considering the first round, I had a low expectation set from the first round, but now the tournament is absolutely amazing. Great stuff. Okay, so by the way, this pawn, is it an issue? No, you just play. Actually, you play king b6 here, threatening mate. Forget about the pawns. Not king a6. I mean knight b5 is even stronger. And that's it. Black has to give up the rook. That's totally hopeless. Let's go back though. Earlier, didn't black have a promising position at some point with this kind of Benko Gambit style play? So I mean, Kasparov was often sacrificing Benko Gambit style in the King's Indian type positions. It's a way of generating counterplay and pressure. Okay, the exchange of knight square bishops, queen e2. But, okay, what was white actually threatening here to prompt black to sack both knights? f4 is the immediate threat, of course. Forget b3. f4 is on the cards here. And although only with +1 actually. If black had played h6, this looks okay. There's no f4. That's extinguishing surely some of the issues if black plays like this. And I think black's got an active position here. It seems technically. This is very annoying for white. Surely this is compensation for being a pawn down. If we play b3, knight a3, if we can get a blockade on the majority here on the outside pass pawn, surely black doesn't have too much to worry about here. c4, it looks fine. The way he's played it is actually strangely committal, surprising to play knight takes b2. So if f4 is the most serious threat, then h6, where else is the bishop going on h6 here? Because that would stop white from playing f4. If bishop h4, then almost g5 is tempting. Why doesn't g5 work here? This backfires. for f4 here for queen g4 something. Well, the knight's loose, the knight's still loose, white's still better there. So this is getting tactical. Black doesn't have to play g5. Black can now move this knight against f4. Now with f4 swap places, isn't this okay, or is it better for white? Is this similar to the other blockade? e5, apparently this is very nice for white. So it takes. I guess we can't take on d5 because we're losing something tactically. Knight takes here, takes here. Queen f3. And white apparently is still better after all of that. So anyway, this looks like just a very committal decision though, to play knight takes b2. Very committal. So setting a problem, a challenge of consolidation and trying to soak up black's queenside pressure. So okay, we see now bishop takes c3 as well. Why not keep the dark square bishop? Was this really necessary to play bishop takes c3? Strange. Rook fb8. I have to say this is one of the strangest games. I kind of find it overly committal, Radjabov's play here, personally. Very easy to comment in retrospect with the help of engines here, but it seems a little bit overly committal. I guess he wanted to simplify down the position and see what happened then. So, I mean, if the tension's kept in the position with the dark square bishop on here, maybe okay, white's potentially threatening things like bishop a6 and a4 on the other side. Okay, so we go back to this position where bishop takes c3 is played. Rook takes c3, yeah, it's stronger than queen takes c3. Queen c2, addressing that B file a little bit. Bishop now drops back to c1. Very powerful counterplay squashing strategy, just to be able to play a3 here. White's advantage is getting marked out from an engine point of view, just to be able to play a3. Even just taking the queens off and playing a3 apparently is promising, but he just played a3 inviting black to exchange off, but black didn't for a moment. Now here black took the queens off. If he doesn't, what is white threatening? Just knight e3 and okay, so the queens came off. Black's maybe relying on white's centre being loose soon, so he's putting lots of pressure on white's centre. And here I wondered about e5. If e5 was good a little bit later, I guess e5 might be okay here. Apparently e5 might actually be playable here. Maybe there's just absolutely no rush to play it in this position though. King f2 is just keeping e5 there, because you know, if this pawn moves, then we just take on d6. So maybe there's no rush at all for e5. Seeing what black's going to do. Maybe it's a slight improvement that the king is now over there, just not influencing the game. If black had taken here, I think c5 becomes weak now as a target. Is there conversation for d5? Let's just check this. No, rook takes c5. Yeah, black doesn't seem to have anything going there. So we have this miserable pawn on d6, which simplifies now white's plan considerably. White gets his king now beautifully to c3. That was allowed. So why was that allowed? If black didn't play rook b1, what is white threatening? Just rook c3 basically to evict this rook. So things are happening anyway. So now the rook is free for this maneuver. So now this is getting really dangerous. The threat here as well is just rook c1 is actually not to do with d6, because I think rook takes c4 there is possible. So it's not really to do with d6, black's next move. It's getting ready for d6 though, to be further pressurized with rook e6. But now, yeah, this is still, the two minor pieces are beating the rook here. Black dare not simplify into a king and pawn ending here. I think it'll be absolutely hopeless if we just quickly check this. It's just absolutely hopeless ending here. So black, yeah, he's on his way out. Check. The king is a major issue as well. Now, even if this pawn is dangerous on h5, it's black's king safety which has been challenged here quite expertly. If the king actually went to a6, maybe there's a mating there on the cards. Or just bishop d4, rook a7. It's still bad for black. So, okay, white's pieces are suddenly coordinating quite well against the black king now. That's maybe an instructive way to simply exploit the bishop and knight against rook. Not being too concerned about black munching pawns. He's going for the king really. That will be the key thing. King safety now. And even here there's an issue of king safety. It's not about protecting pawns. In this position, just briefly checked out here that the move here is king b6. The black king is in trouble in the final position, but we see after king b4, I think it was the resignation was here. So we've had a staggering set of 4 games in this round, which I'm really happy with, and I think most spectators around the world are really happy now. They're enlivened, invigorated by these games. These are bloodthirsty games, attacking, fighting chess. No prizes for coming second in this tournament. Comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.